How's it going, everyone? This is Imperial Magistrate, and today I actually have a movie review. I am reviewing the film Napoleon, starring Joaquin Phoenix as the titular character, and was directed by Ridley Scott, most famous for the Alien movies. And this was a movie that I had moderate interest for, and you could probably guess because I am a history fan, and I'm a big fan of French history, although, believe it or not, I'm not actually particularly that fond of Napoleon as a individual. Obviously, I acknowledge, his sort of military greatness and the impact he had on world history at that, not just European history. But this wasn't a film that I was like super into seeing, just because a lot of things I saw in the trailers, I just thought, okay, there's some neat action scenes, but it just doesn't really look like something I'd be super into. But I decided to go see it with my grandmother. And overall, I'm gonna give my thoughts on the quality of the film, and then some sort of problems I have in terms of historical accuracy. So, now answering the first question, was the film good? And in general, I would say not really. I did not particularly care for this film, and I just felt this film was not exactly that enjoyable. The big action scenes are actually pretty far and few. The film is mostly set in France, despite the trailers showing a lot of the sort of big set pieces in other parts of Europe and even in Egypt, of course. But by and large, the film is mostly set within various palaces in France. So if you want to see this movie thinking it's going to be like a big war movie, it isn't. And this leads to my next problem with the film, which is that the story itself is really mostly about Napoleon and his relationship with his first wife, Josephine Bonaparte. It starts off with Napoleon witnessing the execution of Marie Antoinette, which, by the way, didn't happen in real life, but that's besides the point. And then shortly after that, the Reign of Terror ends and the prisoners are freed, including Josephine herself. Napoleon meets her at a party, and eventually they, get together, they get married, and the rest of the movie plays out. And this relationship part, I really wasn't too fond of, and not just because of the historical inaccuracies. But I guess this is a good way to segue into my problems with it as a historical drama. Now, I understand as a movie, there's going to be literary license and liberties taken. I understand, unless it's a documentary, it's not going to be completely accurate. And I can forgive a lot of the inaccuracies, but there's just some things that I can't really forgive, and a lot of the things that I don't like actually hurt the film quite a lot. For starters, Napoleon himself. Napoleon Bonaparte was a great leader and was a grand military general. Um, and yet, this film depicts him as basically a dork. Like, there's no other way to put it. He's basically a dork and a simp for Josephine. I really wish I was joking, but I'm not. There's no other way to describe him. He is very nervous around her. He hardly knows what to say, and he sticks by her even when it turns out that she was having an affair with another guy. Literally like minutes after they were married, and he goes off to Egypt. And this is another major problem I have with is the film makes Napoleon so obsessed with Josephine, and this is also completely inaccurate to real life. Now, Napoleon did genuinely love Josephine, but the way the film portrays it is just completely over the top and completely ridiculous. In fact, this is part of the plot, and that is later on in the film, Napoleon contemplates divorcing Josephine, as it is pretty clear that she can't have children and he wants an heir. And this is totally opposite of in real life, where when it was clear Josephine wasn't able to have any more children, Napoleon divorced her pretty quickly. Now they stayed on good terms, but in the film, it's kind of this big back and forth between Napoleon and he sort of goes back and forth of whether he does want to divorce Josephine, whether he doesn't. He actually eventually decides to sleep with a younger girl to see if he could get her pregnant, and ends up working. So it becomes clear that Josephine's the problem, and then he reluctantly divorces her and sends her off to live in her chateau in the countryside. And like I said, this is just completely inaccurate to the real life story of Napoleon. Again, I wouldn't say he didn't care about Josephine, but he wasn't as obsessive over her, and he himself had numerous affairs without a second thought, um, even when he was married to her. And even then, kind of the idea of this film, in my opinion, seems to be that Josephine is like the driving force behind Napoleon. Completely untrue. For example, he returns from Egypt because one of his friends basically tells him about Josephine's affair with whoever it was, and that didn't happen in real life. Napoleon returned from Egypt because the mission was failing, and he figured he could save face and eventually name himself first consul of France and avoid humiliation. And and then later on in the film, after he divorces Josephine, Napoleon basically blames his downfall and his attempt to invade Russia on the fact that Josephine's no longer with him. And this is just completely ridiculous, and completely undermines Napoleon as a historical figure. Again, Napoleon was this strong, charismatic figure in history, and in this film, he's anything but. Joaquin Phoenix is just very dour and stoic, and he just does not come off as believable as a guy who could take over a country in a military coup and then lead armies to conquer Europe's greatest powers. And like I said, and this is another major thing is the whole part of whether Josephine is infertile or not. It's like in real life the reason is pretty. It was obvious because Josephine was in fact 6 years older than Napoleon. But in this film they don't really address it, and it doesn't really seem like Josephine is depicted as being that much older than Napoleon. And I think there'd be far more drama off of that sort of dynamic than anything this movie does. And that's not even getting into some of like the battle scenes, which are all just pure nonsense. And Ridley Scott has basically admitted that they're all completely nonsensical. The Battle of Austerlitz, where he and I don't think this is really a spoiler because it's in the trailers, but if you really want to skip ahead, just go ahead a few seconds. But the big ice lake that he fires on, that didn't happen. Him shooting the pyramids, that didn't happen either. There's even a part where he finds a sarcophagus, which is completely ridiculous because the King Tut's tomb wasn't discovered until well over 100 years after Napoleon was dead. And so overall, as a movie itself, I don't really enjoy it that much. I don't think it was the worst movie ever. I just think it was pretty dull and forgettable. And as a historical drama based on the great figure of Napoleon Bonaparte, I think it fails extremely bad because, like I said, Napoleon does not act like how he did in real life. He is the opposite of what you would think of a popular leader. And I honestly think it was just a huge mistake for Ridley Scott to try to compress Napoleon's whole rise and fall of 15 years into, I think this film's like just under 3 hours, maybe it's like 240. Well, that was a big mistake because they do skip over a whole lot of important stuff of Napoleon's reign, such as his invasion of Spain, his invasion of Italy, his feud with the Catholic Church, and so on. And it's just like really, this movie just was not very good, and I wouldn't recommend seeing it. I'd recommend just sticking with something like Waterloo, um, which came out I think in the 1950s or 60s. If you're really curious, I'd recommend seeing the I think it's 1923 Napoleon film. It was pretty revolutionary for its time. It's pretty long and it is a silent film, but it's something that's worth watching. You can probably find it for free on like some archive website. But that's my thoughts on Napoleon, the film, of course. What do you guys think of it? If you saw it, leave a comment down below. And if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content. And I'll see you all next time.